Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 1201 Whip Tongue. Nadina used Whip Tongue of Kali a few more times, before she realized that she could beat the tree like this. Kalsmir's decaying breath also showed only a temporary effect. As for Dyromold, the core worm couldn't show his potential unless the barrier fell. Nadina's strategy hinged on two factors. The first was her divine skill. Kali represented death, but unlike other gods of death who reigned over something like a realm of the dead, Kali represented the cycle of life and time. Over time, everything had to do and make space for something new. The skill the necromancer wanted to rely on for her strategy was Wheel of Time, which allowed her to rapidly age the opponent. Since the skill was extremely taxing even to just use on a weaker humanoid opponent, she had devised a strategy to strengthen this skill with a formation set up in Delta. However, trees didn't age like other living beings. Just time was not enough to kill them. Seeing how quickly the tree lapped up her army as if to mock her guardian goddess, the tree also wouldn't die from lack of nutrients if it experienced rapid aging at this moment. This was where Dyromold came into play. The skill Rottenwell it had learned when becoming an undead legend could literally poison the wells. A single attack could taint the very groundwater itself and make plant life impossible. The skills alone were probably not enough, but together, she could have the tree experience centuries of living in this kind of polluted environment. She couldn't imagine anything surviving that. The only drawback was that the attack had to hit the ground and the hole in the barrier was blocked by the massive tree. She could only buy time for the special ops to set up the preparations for her plan. Once that was done, Delta would watch this tree shrivel away as quickly as it grew. At least, this was the plan until she felt a sudden tug at the edge of her consciousness. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong with Fafi. On the mountain slopes below Delta, laid the legendary undead Hydra, wrestled to the ground by 24 colossi. The crypt guards Evie had stolen from the colossal dungeon were a massive power, but one she could barely control, so she could only take out a few at a time, especially while maintaining her troops on Delta's walls. Each giant humanoid was hard-pressed pushing one head to the ground, as Evie was busy preparing a vast spell, by spreading a field of daffodils across the mountain slope. Why was she doing something like this when there was a war raging on above? Holy Quest, mirror of the underworld, everything where it belongs. The Hydra is a beast of Olympian lore. Your guardian Persephone thinks it would look much better as part of your entourage. Requirement: steal the undead Hydra 0/1. Quest reward: unlock a new skill. In the middle of battle, a quest notification had suddenly appeared in her face. The quest was actually the sub-quest of the Holy Quest Mirror of the Underworld Evie had received during her visit to the Temple of Persephone. The main quest was about turning her undead army into a mirror image of Hades, as in the underworld, by collecting undead fitting the beasts and heroes of Olympian lore that found their eternal rest in Hades. As a reward, her death set would be blessed and she would receive a fitting skill. After getting the quest update, she had left command of her undead on the walls to Commander Geraun, before searching the Hydra. Although the immortal witch was not overly confident, she was sure Persephone would not give her an impossible quest. She wasn't that kind of goddess. After Ceres left, she used the chance while the Hydra was paralyzed, to summon the colossi and make sure it stayed down. Intricate patterns created by tufts of black daffodils formed a massive magic circuit. Spring of Darkness. Evie finally activated her divine skill. At her command, the lines of flowers started blooming all around the Hydra. Intricate patterns created by the black daffodils activated the magic circuits. As they opened their blossoms, they shone in a bright blue light, reminiscent of Seth's spirit flame. Matching the flowers covering the mountain slope, the undead Hydra also shone in an aura of blue light. Spring of Darkness was a skill that connected the dead to her own pseudo-Hades, where she could store her troops. This allowed her to take control of corpses, natural undead, or even wrestle away their control of them by cutting the connection to their master. However, the target and its master in this case were special. As the chosen of Persephone, she was the champion of the queen of the Olympian underworld. On top of that, she wore the death set, made of enriched Necron and partially blessed by Styx, as well as Acheron's finger, a legendary pendant blessed by the Acheron. But her target was a legendary undead Hydra, created by the chosen of Kali. Evie could only imagine what Nadina had done to convert the beast into an undead, but it felt more like a lich than a corpse that was reanimated. A forced lechification? It seemed that the soul of the beast was ripped out of and resealed into its immortal head, bound by powerful black magic to allow the necromancer to control it. This was not the usually deep connection between a necromancer and their summon, but Evie understood the obvious advantage of this technique. The colossi she controlled were far from being legends, but it took a very high control stat and a lot of mental power to control them properly. A legend had to be several magnitudes above one of them. Based on her expertise as an immortal witch, this leechification technically allowed any specified individual to control the undead, while the necromancer only needed to use a superficial spell to improve the function of the seal. While this made the cost to maintain control over the legend almost non-existent, this also meant that the actual link between the undead and Nadina was only superficial. She just needed to neutralize the binding magic weaved in the lich seal, to take control of the Hydra. The explanation of this realization is long, but for Evie this came instinctively thanks to her skills and experience. Following her instinct, he began casting spells to undo the black magic shackles of the Hydra, while maintaining the spring of darkness to immediately take control once the curse was lifted. Her actions were not without reaction. While the Hydra's struggle to resist became stronger, the power flowing through the connection between the legend and its master also grew. Nadina had noticed that someone was messing with her summon. But could she stop it, just because she noticed? The chosen of Kali was far away, but Evie was right here. It was easy for her to block the opponent's attempt to take control with the spring of darkness she had prepared. Halt! Only the Hydra's instinctive thrashing, as Evie started tugging at the strings binding its souls, could get in her way. On the last stretch, when the beats became so violent even the colossi couldn't resist its might and were about to be thrown around, she used the skill of her legendary pendant. Decree of Acheron could paralyze any undead that heard her shout. Even the legendary beats could not resist as Evie unwound the last string of the binding spells, momentarily turning the Hydra into a free undead, just before the spring of darkness rushed in to fulfill its original purpose. Ding! You have fulfilled the requirements for everything where it belongs. You have unlocked the skill Lore Master Leave 1. Lore Master Leave 1, Passive Skill. The requirements to control undead who match the lore of Hades are lowered by 10%. The stats of undead that match the lore of Hades are improved by 20%. Finally, Evie mumbled before she lost consciousness. Chapter 1202 Stone Gates. Fuff, nu, echoed in the sky, and moments later the undead manning the walls vanished around Garoun. Only the adventurers and golems sparsely spread were left to defend. Well, and the huge tree that was doing all the work. The commander and his men had been quite useless for the past few minutes since the tree appeared and began to defend the city faster than the hordes of zombies could replenish. However, he was concerned about Evie, the necromancer who originally summoned their undead friendlies. Combined with the shriek in the sky, had something happened to her? He could only hope she didn't sacrifice herself to take down Fuff. Just as he had the time for some idle thoughts, there was an alarm from inside the city. Damn it, I told you we should go faster, the archer said, trying to lift the last gate stone together with the tank. Security in Delta was tight. The moment their stealth spell stopped working, they were spotted by golem sentries that activated the alarm. Isn't that why we started with the gate instead of? The tank tried to comment, but he was interrupted by their leader. Zip it and hurry up, the party leader barked as he drew up the last signs of the magic circle on the ground. They had been a little late when they finally found a medium-sized plaza at some distance from the tree that fit to set up their set of gate stones. To make up time, they immediately started with the stone gate, instead of the hell gate. It was the right decision, otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to finish the gate before the stealth magic ran out. If it wasn't for the quick alarm, they could have still finished the secondary gate. Now the circular square was covered with white chalk markings, while the archer and the tank set the last gate stone to finish the henge at the center of his scribbling. It was a singular stone gate, made up of 2 vertical and 1 horizontal gate stone. Gate stones were extremely precious, as they were a catalyst that could create a gateway between worlds, even with such a simple setup. The meticulous formation surrounding it was just to properly set the coordinates unless it would create a gate to a random place in a random world. The fact that the individual gate stones could be transported in the inventory made them even more valuable. Quick deployment, and easy transportation. If it wasn't for the few drawbacks like the scarcity of materials and lack of flexibility, they could have replaced the usual teleport formation. Of course, this was not the original plan. Just like Nadina's plan to take down the progenitor tree, this operation was originally not meant to be executed in Delta. This was a plan to steal credits once they found Minas Mar's lair, or laid siege to Little Sigma. This had changed over the past 2 weeks, when it became clear that Minas Mar was going to defend the central district. It was during the journey that they had gotten instructions from Lord Byron to change the plan and look for a chance to set up the gate stones in an opportune moment. Hijacking Nadena's original plan was the best chance to sabotage her and achieve the mission. Once Lord Byron's troops invaded, the situation here didn't matter. They would not only deal with the tree but also with Nadena. Meanwhile, they would seek refuge in Lord Byron's domain once the passage was established. The moment the last gate stone was placed, a pane of light filled the stone gate, just after the alarm rang. Once the gate was fully established in a few minutes, they could pass through to safety. "All right, let's finish up while the gate is forming and get out of here," the party leader said, moments before a massive paw slammed into his side. Carried by the force, he penetrated the wall of the nearby building and was embedded into the dense mesh of rebar. The giant white tiger's pupils constricted when he saw the gate at the center of the square, recognizing what it was. He watched as the pane of light in the gate started growing, expanding past gate stones. Toho was the closest one by and had turned into his tiger form for speed, so he was the first to arrive. With a curse, the Tija ignored the attacks from the remaining party and fled into a nearby building to turn back to his humanoid form. He had to report back, there were more alarms than just this one. "Lena, this is Toho. They are setting up stone gates in the city," he contacted the princess at the command center. These artifacts were a serious strategical resource, as they allowed quick deployment of interdimensional gates, even on enemy territory. The biggest problem was that, once they were deployed, they couldn't be stopped from outside, the connection would be established and could only be broken again afterward. The others had to hurry, if they came too late like him, they would face a dimensional invasion from several places. "Lena? Are you there? Did you hear me?" he asked again. He stared at the communication orb in his hands after he shouted into it. There was only silence, nobody answered him. Was the orb broken or something? If they jammed the communication then? "We got it, Toho," Lena finally answered after several moments of nervous silence. "Sorry for the silence, but I had to contact Karina to have the tree act inside the city," the princess explained her silence. The moment she heard about the gates, she acted to react as quickly as possible. As she spoke, roots shot from the ground exploding the pavement in all directions. In the plaza, the party of people above Leave 140 put up a valiant fight against the botanical foe. "I can see that," Toho mumbled after watching the one-sided battle for several moments. As strong and valiant as their attempt was, they could not resist the attack of the roots for long. Ultimately, they were caught by the roots and pulled to the depths below Delta. "Give me a moment to check the situation," the princess said, before disconnection the call. Meanwhile, Toho could only watch the pane of light keep growing. It was half the size of the surrounding skyscrapers when it finally showed signs of slowing. It formed an illusory copy of the gate, several dozen times bigger than the original, framing the pane. It wouldn't take long for it to stabilize. Toho didn't look forward to what would come through this portal. He was staring at the towering sign of invasion when the orb vibrated. "Lena. Bad news. Even with the tree coming in, we only managed to stop 2 of the places from establishing the stone gate. There are currently 6 active gates. How is the status on your end?" Lena asked concerned, as Toho's was probably the first to be completed. "It's about to open. Are you going to send reinforcements?" the Tigerman asked concerned. "No, leave it to the tree, you should get out of there. We will reassemble and deploy depending on the situation." Toho swallowed hard when she said that they would leave it to the tree. The reason the tree was originally only attacking outside, was because it couldn't really differentiate friend or foe unless Karina controlled it. So he hurried his steps. He had no interest in experiencing the legend's friendly fire. Turning into a tiger, Toho sprinted through the empty streets, just in time to evade the flood of rising roots and falling vines that surrounded the gate. Lena let out a tired sigh. It was one thing after another, however, this new move didn't seem to fit with the strategy they had seen so far. Nadena Durnham was a necromancer commanding several legends. If their goal was to set up gates inside Delta and call reinforcements directly from the Empire, they could have done so from the start, considering they had a stealth technology that could get past their security. Why draw out the battle and call them, only when the Guardian Tree made its appearance? The princess could understand that Nadena was feeling them out so far, but now she was just hovering above Delta with 3 of her legends, not doing anything. Was she really waiting for the reinforcements? If this was her plan to deal with the tree, then they couldn't underestimate what might come from those gates. She doubted it, but maybe things could become dicey if they didn't get serious. "Seth? Seth, are you there? She tried to contact the blacksmith to update him on the situation, but there was no answer. Chapter 1203 Lumbering? Above Delta. Those damn old bastards, she cursed. Her fists clenched so hard, she could hear the metal of her gauntlets creaking. A slumbering ember, the hidden fire of hatred and ambition flared up, far greater than her indignation toward the blacksmith. The moment she saw gates growing in places surrounding the guardian tree, Nadina knew that she was betrayed. Seeing how they used something as precious as the gate stone, she instinctively knew that it had to be one of the royals of Spacia. One of those decrepit, calcified pieces of shit that had stood in her way long before even the evaluation. To think one of these stumbling rocks had the gall to interfere with her campaign. It just lent itself to concentrate her wrath, accumulated across her whole journey here. The hardship, the losses, the worries that accumulated up to this point, and these absolute cock-gobblers were now trying to take her final prize from her? Good, fine. Did they want to play this game? She raised her fist and all undead surrounding the delta began retreating into the purple dimension that had opened for them. They wanted to face Minas Mar? Then they were going to do so alone. Relocating to Kalsmere, Dyromold and Piotr also retreated. Riding the dragon skeleton, she returned through the portal in the sky, back to the place where the remaining soldiers were stationed. Nadina would bide her time and watch her enemies rip each other apart. And then, when they were all on their last leg, she would swoop in and get revenge, for herself, for Fuff, and even for Uzrock, that disappointment of an orc. World 234Z, Empire of Spacia. 8 armies made up of 15,000 high-level players each player clad in at least an epic set of armor and possessing an epic class were assembled before him. They were his personal troops, incomparable to the simple troops shoved onto the little necromancer girl. As if anyone would entrust an upstart like her with such hand-picked elites. His 8 armies surrounded a giant 8-sided column, hewn from a small granite mountain. On 6 of the 8 sides, portals had begun to open. This column was the focus anchor set as coordinates for the stone gates. My lord, it seems that the collaborators only managed to deploy 6 of the 8 gates, the advisor mentioned on his side. Byron frowned and rolled his eyes. I can see that. Have 2 of the armies stay back on standby. We will deploy them depending on the situation on the other side. When the first gate was established they did nothing at first. Everyone was waiting for the teams that set up the gates to come over and report the situation on the other side. In the meantime, the other gates also opened, but there was also no sign of those who set them up. Following protocol, golem eyes were sent in to find out the situation on the other side. Based on their original information, there was supposed to be a battlefield after all. If the teams didn't return, it meant they were caught after building the gates. Soon, another adjutant appeared at Byron's side. My lord, you have to see this, he said and handed him a magic plate to watch the video of the golem eye. He couldn't help but gasp, when he saw the forest of vines, pressing against the cracking barrier surrounding the stone gate. Through the gaps in the roving flora, he could see the shadow of a giant tree, covering the sky. So it was true that there was a legendary tree under Minas Mar and the necromancer girl actually managed to tickle it out of them. Very good. However, they had to move quickly now. The barrier of the portal was not meant to resist this kind of attack from a legendary existence. Tell the generals to ready their troops and stay on standby. Tell Jarvan, Soti, Vermeer, Krista, and the bishop to get their parties ready. They will enter first to do some lumbering, he chortled at his own little joke. Byron doubted the tree would be able to stand up against 5 legend and their parties. Jarvan, the Death Claw, was a newer legend and attained great fame by killing an Orcish legend from Kazdam, during an expedition to a non-system world. He used a pair of legendary obsidian claws that were said to rend space itself. Soti, the hawk, was an elf and legendary archer. She had already served Byron's family when he wasn't even born yet. Despite her age, she still looked as young as the first time he saw her. It was said her arrows could darken the sky and would always find their target. Vermeer, the wolf, started out as a mercenary on one of the border worlds. They said that nobody he pursued ever escaped, an inevitable hunter. Even Byron didn't know what weapons the beastmen usually used. He was also the only legend under him without a party. Krista the Benign was a legendary healer who went the path of the divine doctor, that could even bring back the dead. She was not only well versed in healing skills and spells but also had an expansive knowledge of medicine and alchemy. Her party was rumored to be immortal because of her skills. Last in the array of legends that would raze Minas Mar to the ground was Bishop Demas of the Order of Cuvdite. He was a legendary crusader and leader of a knight order under the Church of Cuvdite. Byron promised the church exclusive rights to earth if they sent support, and they actually sent the Demas, the Heath Namur. Not only was Byron confident that they would be able to deal with the legends of Minas Mar, but they were more than capable enough to get rid of Nadina and her rotten entourage, too. After the parties were briefed on the situation in Delta, they were ready to bring him victory. Delta. To send them to clear of weeds, Vermeer was disappointed at first, but right now he was frightened. Right after stepping through the gate, he got to see one of the most fear-inducing sights of his life. He came just in time to witness hundreds of wooden tentacles crush the temporary barrier surrounding the gate. The only reason he was not squashed was his trait, Ghost of the Woods, which allowed him to become incorporeal and pass through trees and vegetation. Even if it was legendary, it was a tree, so he was able to phase through the vines and roots that came to rip him apart. However, passing through solid matter came at a price, so the wolf beastman had just enough time to pass through the wall of murderous vines and activate his stealth to escape the onslaught. He specialized in the hunt and single combat, not in facing such massive attacks. Vermeer had to halt for a moment. Although he heard about what Earth was like and what to expect of Delta, seeing the giant structures that made up their cities had him stumped for a moment. The sound of explosions, fire, and the intermittent light of holy beams erupting in other places of the city brought him back to the moment and reassured him that his colleagues had survived just like him. Finally having the time to determine the situation, he took back his previous thought. This was far from pulling out weeds. In person, the tree was far bigger than it seemed in the video. This wall of wood, spanning several hundred meters and ending in green foliage, could hardly be called a tree in his mind. If he used his strongest attack against the trunk, he might be able to block a hole through it, but the foe didn't look like that would actually harm it. He saw beams of divine power shooting high above the structures of the city and severing dozens of vines and roots, but they just regrew. Yet, instead of getting himself in trouble with something that would not even bother the local flora, he decided to look for another way to help in this situation. He brought some distance between himself and the tree. On the way he took note of the various security nets, before finally finding a spot where he could deactivate his stealth skill. Here, he first contacted command and reported the current situation and his idea. After he was given the green light, he brought out a small wooden dial, resembling a compass. "Reveal what I'm seeking," he whispered to the disc before crushing it in his paw. The seeker disc was a one-use item that could mark the location of anything one knew on their map. This was the restriction, he had to have seen it or them before using the item, and they couldn't be too far away. The next moment, he heard a notification that 2 points of interest were marked on his map. Reactivating his stealth, he began his own little solo mission. Lena couldn't help but be even more confused by the current situation. 4 legends and their parties had appeared to attack the Guardian Tree, while Nadina had actually pulled out. To make things worse, the Tower Master himself still didn't answer their calls. "Mina, can you go look what he is up to?" Chapter 1204 Quick Trip. 2 days earlier, Minas Mar. Dylan Mo, I need you to take me somewhere." The blacksmith approached the space magician. He felt a little sorry for the mage, who had been putting his utmost into buying time over the past 2 weeks, covertly teleporting people, beasts, and golems into the way of Spacia. He looked horribly tired, but Seth needed a soul, an equestrian soul to be specific. Sandra Irving, who was running the shop while Tanamole was still away, unfortunately, couldn't offer him the quality he needed. Even though the size was not an issue, she had no horse-type souls that fit what he was looking for. Meaning Seth had to go out and get one himself. There were no dungeons with horse bosses anywhere in Minas Mar, but Seth had one thing in mind. A creature they had met on their journey northeast, a region Dylan Mo had frequented more often than any of them, to surveil Sigma. Seth was thinking of catching the main body of a Nukkalavi. They had come across what revealed itself to be an auxiliary body of one of these monsters during their journey to Hyperborea, the island of Apollo, to cleanse the dragon scales. If anything was fit to become the soul of the steed of hunger, it had to be this evil fairy creature. Seth had water walking, as well as breathe as an enchantment on his equipment, which would allow him to hunt on and below the water, for the main body of the Nukkalavi. He trusted the effects of the Cloak of Hecate to find his target quickly. "So I just have to get you there and wait for your return?" the mage asked carefully. "Yep, I don't think it will take too long," the blacksmith assured him. "Fine." And that was how Seth arrived 20 minutes later at the shores of Sigma's inland sea, close to the strait that led through the northern mountains. Previously, the air in this place was filled with flocks of flying creatures, but it had considerably cleared up now. They had siphoned a bunch of them to throw at Spacia on their journey. As an integral part of the deportation efforts, Eidolon knew these coordinates the best, which was why they arrived here. At a nearby cave entrance, Seth could see a finished camp, with a tent, supplies, and remnants of a campfire. This was the place the space mage stayed during the past efforts. "I will stay here, while you hunt for your horse," he said, comfortably sitting down on the chair at the entrance of the tent. He ignored Seth and started a fire for himself. Seth was surprised how nonchalantly Mo allowed the Tower Master to get himself in danger, but he also appreciated the trust. He decided to judge it as trust and not indifference. Fully decked out in his equipment, Seth stretched a little before pulling the transparent hood over his face and running onto the sea. Water walking was a passive skill that could be toggled on and off and allowed him to treat water as a solid surface. Concentrating on his vaguely known target, he followed the stars appearing in the hood of his cloak. His original hope was that the cloak would lead him to the location above where the main body of the fearsome monster was hiding in the sea. However, after maybe half an hour of speeding across the water's surface at maximum speed, he felt solid ground reappearing under his feet. Then the stars stopped guiding him as if he had reached his destination. A little confused, Seth raised the hood to see where he ended up. Looking at the map, the blacksmith had crossed a small bulge of the sea and reached a shore closer to the south of the sea. He was kind of the opposite of Eidolon's camp, and could still see his campfire in the distance, using Thaia's vision. No, screams could he hear from the close-by forest. Seth was still puzzled about why the cloak had led him here when an old man with drenched hair came sprinting out of the forest. He spotted Seth and for a moment his face lit up in delight and then fear. "Run! Run! A Nukkalavi is coming," the old man warned Seth as he charged at it. For a moment he was happy that there was actually a Nukkalavi here, but he couldn't see any sign of it in the forest. Seth cocked his head and looked at the man running over. What did the man think he was doing? If there was really a monster chasing him, why would he charge at a stranger and warn them, instead of running the other way to not involve them? Most important was the appraisal result. Water Stag Leave 128. It was the first time he heard of such a monster. The blacksmith decided to wait and see what the creature was trying to do. What happened next was a little surprising. When the old geezer with the wet hair got close to passing by him, he suddenly showed a malicious grin and suddenly jumped at him. He grabbed onto Seth's armor and pulled him into the sea with incredible weight and unexpected speed. It felt like the man was literally stuck to him, as they both fell into the water, right behind Seth. The bard felt the pull of acceleration, and it felt like being dragged by a train, down into the depths. As they sank into the water, Seth was able to observe the old man change. The hands turned to kelp, stuck to him, and his body became that of a black stag, diving into the water. Light quickly faded, which wasn't really a problem for Seth. Neither was being underwater, thanks to Breathe, the enchant on his earth beats ring, which allowed breaking in water and deep mines where oxygen was scarce. Seth reached out his left hand to grab onto one of the antlers. He immediately felt his hand and gauntlet stuck to the creature. Was this its special skill? Its plan was obviously to drown him. The plan had miserably failed. "You are still alive," the beast exclaimed, shocked, surprisingly well articulated for speaking underwater. Seth also noticed that his universal translation was acting to help him understand the being, so it was not speaking a language the system auto-translated for him. "Yep," Seth said, and used the leverage of holding onto its horn, to pull himself into a riding position on its back, which was unexpectedly comfy. "What are you going to do now?" the bard asked curiously, using telepathy. Since he was not crushed by water pressure and didn't drown, he was interested in what the beast would do next. The water stag slowed down, but he stayed silent. Seth licked his lip. He knew this awkward silence. The beast had no plan for this situation. He could almost taste its nervousness and confusion in the water. "Could it be, do you not have an active way to deal damage?" Seth asked, amused, a blade hidden in his words. He had used the time to examine the creature, speedily traveling in the water. After reverting from looking like an ugly old man, the water stag didn't look too bad. It was very big for a stag. What appeared black at first actually seemed like a mix of black and a translucent moss green like jade. It had a mane of kelp and tufts of seaweed at its hooves and tail. The mane was what held onto him previously. Overall, the shape seemed equestrian enough. The color was also adequate. Still, Seth couldn't let go of the idea with the Nukkalavi. Hey, I'm a bit hard-pressed for time here and you are quite quick underwater. If you can get me to the source of the Nukkalavi, I might let you live. Deal, the bard asked sweetly. His proposal was supported by a bright blade that appeared in his right hand and kissed the stag's smooth neck gently. The Nukkalavi? Are you crazy? I'm not taking orders from you. I'm not going there. No way. It stopped talking when the great sog nibbled on its neck and a small bloom of dark blood stained the water. The stag's eyes widened in shock. If you don't bring me there you are useless. There is no reason I shouldn't kill a monster that is going around, drowning innocent bystanders, right? We will reach the destination in just a minute, sir. No need to be impatient. Chapter 1205 The Source? Bottom of the Sigma NC. What is that? The blacksmith asked the stag, still stuck to his back. The source of the Nukkalavi, sir. What they were looking at was what looked like the entrance to the shell of a mollusk that stuck out of a rock cliff at the bottom of the sea. Inside the shell was a disturbingly meat-colored entrance, which was currently shut tightly. This had nothing equestrian at all. How was this spitting out creatures that looked like skinless horses and their riders, fused together into a nightmare-inducing monster? This stag was messing with him. He should have. Seth was about to do something drastic when the entrance opened and subjected him to a scene that would be burned into his mind for the rest of his life. The birth of a Nukkalavi was one of the worst things Seth had seen in his life, so far. It was also undeniable proof that the stag told the truth. The problem was, he couldn't use that for the steed, he needed a horse, or something like it. He was pressed for time, though. His eyes fell on the stag again. Equestrian enough. The color was also adequate. But he had given his word, but what was the word given to a monster worth? He also said he might spare it. Ultimately, Seth stored the sword in his inventory. Fine, let me down and you can leave, he said. He would at least get the soul of that thing as a consolation prize and be on his way. The cloak had brought him on a ride that brought him to the source of the Nukkalavi. It was his own fault assuming that the source would be horse-like because the auxiliary body was. The stag had once again fallen silent. You can let me down, right? Seth asked suspiciously. Oh, of course, but you have to grab my antlers with both your hands. Then you have the power to order me and release yourself, it assured him. Is that your geese? Seth asked. If this creature was a being that appeared with the awakening of the realm, the condition didn't seem as weird. Dig Dimblood had a similar condition about serving the one that caught him. The blacksmith grabbed onto the other antler with his right hand. Haha, you fool! Who would have thought you would believe me? Haha, there is no way to release you until you are dead. You will simply stay with me until you die of thirst. Now that both your hands are bound, you can't use the big scary sword. Haha, the stag broke out laughing, prancing around. In the end, the cloak didn't disappoint. It was Seth who made the detour, despite having the goal right in front of him. Welp, I gave you the chance, don't forget that in a moment, the bard whispered into its mind. What are you talking about? Are you already delirious? It asked amused, happily prancing through the water, quickly getting away from the entrance and the Nukkalavi that had emerged from it. One moment it was prancing in the water, the next it landed on solid, dry ground. Before it towered a huge tree with dark windows and a door. Legion was currently empty as all the golems and Faer were stationed in Delta. While the stag was surprised about suddenly appearing inside Legion's space, the blacksmith's hand grasped the antlers tightly. Let's see if your ashes will still stick to me. The tragic squeal of the sticky stag echoed in Legion, as the soggy beast was bathed in a sea of draconic flames. Seth's whole body was enveloped in fire and so was the beast. Without the water surrounding them, it was easier for the flame to show its full potential and the stag had next to no way to defend itself. It was thrashing around, crying in pain, and trying to get him off, but it was no longer in the position to decide when he got off. It tried shape-shifting and magic, but nothing could weaken the blacksmith's grasp. Lastly, it started apologizing and begging, to no avail. Seth held no mercy for the monster, as it turned to ashes under his very hands. When the power began leaving its body, the spirit blacksmith used spirit capture to rip the soul from the dying body. With its death, his hands and body no longer stuck to it. He got off, leaving the coals to fall apart. Soul of a water stag, massive, epic, ego, crafting material. The soul of a water stag, a water spirit native to Earth. It retains 94% of its original skill and 82% of its personality. The soul has a high affinity to water and illusion. Trait, tricky opportunist. Seth had been ready to augment it with the cultivator's souls if it wasn't too big, but the water stag actually gave him a massive soul. It even had a trait, although the trait wasn't too great. Tricky opportunist improved the power of skills by 20% if it's involved in fooling someone. The examination of the soul also revealed the beast's geese. As a beast of water, the stag was only allowed to leave its home body of water if it brought a sacrifice on its return. On the other hand, the beast was able to gain part of the victim's power if it was sentient and died in the water itself. Considering how strong the stag already was, Seth seriously questioned what sentient being it had found to sacrifice up here. His first thought was the dwarfs they had found in these northern mountains, but from what Seth heard they never left their minds. Although he was curious, this wasn't the time to dawdle. He had a soul that roughly fit his criteria, it was time to return. After leaving Legion, he threw a last look at the bizarre origin of the Nukkalavi. If it wasn't for the stag, he might have fought it. Probably for hours. Right now, he decided not to. Seeing how he was now stuck at the bottom of the Sigma NC, without a water taxi to bring him back up, Seth decided to use home call on this rare occasion and directly return to the entrance hall of Mina's March. Dripping sea water everywhere, Seth contacted Dylan Mo, who he had already returned, before returning to his workshop. Getting the soul was just the first step. While he started working on the next step, he put the stag soul into the soul refinery. The geese was not something that would be helpful as Hunger's mount, and neither was its personality. "Shall we have a little talk?" Seth used telepathy to contact the souls. An intact ego was important for what he intended to do. "Ah! It's you. What have you done to me? What is this place?" The stag's voice came back, full of panic. "Oh? You died, don't you remember?" The soul stayed silent for a while after Seth's question, but the blacksmith didn't feel like giving it the time to sort out its trauma of burning alive. "It doesn't matter right now. I have your soul in my grasp and you have a choice to make. Shall I erase your ego, or will you be obedient and make a deal with me?" The demonic bard presented the options with a friendly business smile. "That doesn't really sound like a choice," the stag mumbled. "You have options, it's a choice," the demonic bard insisted. Chapter 1206 Ready. Mina's Mar 4 hours. Seth had worked on a formation and he was just putting the finishing touches to the carving at the center of a workshop adjacent room. With a strained sigh, he lifted the engraving tool to wipe away his sweat and look at his work when the door flew open and a hectic cat girl stormed in. "Mina! Why are you almost breaking my door?" the blacksmith cried out in surprise. The thought of the amount of work that could have been ruined, had she done that just a moment early, froze the blood in his veins. "I don't care, things are getting serious outside and you wouldn't pick up your orb or answer the phone," she exclaimed in a hurry. Feeling slight guilt, he glanced at the communication orb and his phone, both buried under a bunch of blueprints and papers on a workbench. In his concentration, he had not noticed their commotion. Okay, it's my fault. Calm down and explain what is going on," the blacksmith quickly gave in and asked her to explain what was happening outside. He frowned when Mina explained what happened so far and how they had to release the tree. The blacksmith had been quite confident in their preparations, to the point that he even doubted that they would have to release the tree on the enemy. To think Nadina had managed to amass this many legends. Maybe it would have been better to call in the Guardians and Python, there was enough time in the past 2 weeks. However, his frown turned into confusion, when she explained what happened after the tree was released. Of course, the tree went on a one-sided slaughter, as expected of a hanging tree, but the enemy's actions were weird. So Nadina pulled out her undead when the portals opened and 4 parties led by Legend came out to attack the tree. For a moment he tried to make sense of their actions. Was this all their plan from the start? Make them show all their cards, before infiltrating Delta with a new set of legends to raid the tree and then pulling out her undead to take away the tree's source of food? Especially the fact that Nadina also pulled back. Even if they low-tier undead were no help, if she used her undead legends to work together with the parties they would have had a better chance. Not that Seth was worried for the tree. Not in the slightest. Even if there were several legends raiding it, Seth couldn't believe they had a chance to destroy it. Especially since its core root was still in Mina's March. If they were really strong, they could destroy the main body, but the tree would regrow given time and resources. All of this seemed overly convoluted for a strategy, however, there was one explanation that fit the current situation quite well. Spacia was not as united as they expected, and the two groups were not actually allies. Looks like someone fucked with Nadina's plans. I will finish soon, just leave the legends to the tree until then. Really? This fast? Mina asked, having experienced when Seth needed almost a week of non-stop work to finish a single mount. Well, whether this works or not is still questionable, but I will definitely finish soon. I can only hope the tree won't finish them off without me, he added jokingly. I'm sure it will succeed. Let's call Lena and tell her. World 234Z, Empire of Spacia. The tree had taken action at 8 places within Delta, 6 of them turned out to become gates to a different world. Before it could break the barrier on 4 of them, legends appeared to protect them. However, this left 2 portals unprotected, as it guarded those gates in anticipation of food that would substitute the undead army that suddenly ran away, a single, curious vine-made, and crown-blowing discovery. The gates went both ways. If we enforce the power here and here, we might be able to reinstate the barrier on the other side without passing over, and couple of hex technicians were inspecting the giant gate, talking about ways to keep it out. What insolence! It had just made this discovery, it couldn't allow this. With a touch of the vine, the technicians turned to dust and the nutrition was sent back to the trunk, together with an idea. Close the goddamn gates! I told you to close them! Byron hollered from his seat, overlooking the great column. In anger, fueled by anxiety, he looked at the ring of gates. 2 of the 8 gates were overgrown by vines and roots. The thick vines rushing out of the portal pressed against the defensive shield on this side of the gateway. The interdimensional gate could barely be seen through the giant thicket that tried to invade their world. We already cut the mana input and rerouted it to the shield. The problem is those vines, they are supplying the gate with power to keep it open, one of the hex technicians shrieked, fearing for his life. Reinforce the barrier further, do it for all of them. The troops will help. I don't want that thing to come through those gat. His speech was interrupted by a shattering sound that almost blew out his ears. The barrier had exploded under the pressure of the vines. Go! Stop those things! Don't let it take root on my land! Byron commanded his generals and the armies jumped into battle. Delta, the alarm has been triggered at the tower barrier, one of the operators suddenly exclaimed to overpower the bustle of the command center. Cursing inside, the princess commanded the man to put it on the big screen. In the past 2 weeks, Minasmar did their best to evacuate the citizens of Delta, but there was no way to deport tens of millions in a matter of weeks, not to mention that there was not enough space where they could be brought. This led to Delta being split into 2 parts. 3/4 of the city were completely abandoned at this point. Although it was best to avoid battle in the city, if it had to be, this was the designated area to do so. The rest was the district was protected by the Magic Tower's own barrier, which existed as a secondary barrier below Delta's main barrier. Although it is called secondary, it was actually the main defense, as all people that could be evacuated, were moved here. The tower barrier was the last line of defense. If anything got past it, they would have to expect civilian casualties. On the big screen, the scenes of the 2 places appeared and showed 2 more gates that had been completed before they could notice them. The enemy had put 2 gates right at their doorstep. They had just started taking shape, but there was nothing that could be done to stop them, once the gate stones were activated. Get everyone to prepare, we will attack what and whoever will come out from those gates. Lena gave her commands to rearrange the troops they had kept in Delta and called back when the Guardian Tree stepped in. The named golems, the members of the field teams, the ordinary golems, and the locals, as well as the elites under Rich, the slave Manser. Suddenly, Lena's personal communication orb vibrated. Seth, the princess asked, surprised, angry, and a little relieved. Hey, Lena. How's the situation? I'm ready for the party. Chapter 1207 half-assed echo. 15 minutes earlier. To improve Forgebrown's golem formation was not a sudden idea. Seth had actually worked off and on it, whenever he had time. The first step had been the Faer formation, the circle that was able to create a living body for a deceased soul, given a foundation. However, this was the result he had worked on and off on since around the time he began selling golems to Arjit Noer. The problem with the Faer was that the creation of a body was almost impossible unless the soul regained enough information to form its own ego. Using the knowledge he gained learning the generic automaton ego of Hephaestus from Cormac Pale and his own experience, he had tried to create a similar formation that worked closer to the original version. But even with Alzalsar's help, creating that would have taken a long time, if it wasn't for a different change. When his enchantment reached level 3, the spirit blacksmith had not only unlocked things connected to his blessings but also the enchantments his predecessor had created with enchantment leave 3. And this one small list contained what he had been trying to make, an already improved version of the original golem formation. It was quite similar to Seth's Feyre formation. Like Seth's take, it was a fixed magic circle, which built the body and imprinted Forgebrown's own golem ego formation onto the soul used as a seed. It was part of a blueprint for an item, that could automatically deploy this enchantment on the ground, which probably started out as a carved platform that would be carried in the inventory and used when needed. This was his new starting point, for this idea. With the knowledge gathered in his own attempt to improve it, it wasn't hard for Seth to understand Forgebrown's work and in what places he could inject his own experience and skills. His predecessor's work was focused on the quick deployment of autonomic golems, similar to how a necromancer would operate, just that he would turn collected souls into intelligent golems, with whatever material was in reach, while necromancer mostly needed corpses for their work. What Seth injected was the customization of the resulting golem, based on the soul used. This came at the cost of time but improved the power of the resulting creation significantly. In theory, in reality, the formation he just finished was his half-assed prototype he threw together because he didn't have the time to properly manufacture the last steed. At the center of the intricate carving was a pile of materials. Enriched Necron, legendary bones of Seth, adamantium, mad Ithildan, and dwarven Ithildan, only the best of the best, intended for the steed of hunger. This was Seth's way of trying to balance the fact that he was not properly crafting it. He didn't know whether that even had an impact on the quest itself, but taking into account that he was technically not forging it, and the end result would probably look more like a stag than a horse. It couldn't hurt to use a bunch of materials that were objectively of higher quality than the previous 2 mounts. The first leg he had started with was also on the pile. All that was left was, "Your turn, little guy. You know the deal." Seth spoke to the soul of the water stag, which he had acquired not too long ago. The terms of the soul contracted agreed to were quite simple: absolute obedience to the blacksmith and the rider he chooses, otherwise its ego would be wiped out and control would go to the golem ego that will be engraved during the production process. "Yes. Good, just listen to the music, don't resist," the bard instructed the soul before placing it in the center of the formation. Seth sat on the chair nearby, taking out Ounce, the demon lyre. His hand started touching the string, playing a simple melody. The soul had no ears, but the music struck a chord deep inside. The stag could hear it, and the calm start of the song slowly led him into a slumbering trance. Before its inner eyes appeared a vast sea, and an unspeakable sorrow filled it, a dread that it could never return. It tried to think of something else, but his mind was empty, there was only fear, as if it was hunting him down. But why couldn't he think of anything else? He tried his best to capture his memories and remember himself in this frontier of loss. Suddenly they came flooding back, like ripped sequences, seen by a third party and not like he was the one doing it. The urge to see the land, despite knowing the price. The regret slowly twisted into fun. The horrible price that had to be paid, became a perverted game. Visiting land not for the freedom, but for the fun of paying the price. Fooling others to take a seat, to touch it, and then drag them to their watery grave. Seeing the memory that returned, he was terrified. He was appalled. No, that wasn't him. Born of a broken beast, but not a broken beast. Born of a broken beast, never a broken beast. Words floated through his mind, disrupting the spiral of horror with unprecedented power, jumbling up everything. Born of a broken beast, but not a broken beast. Born of a broken beast, never a broken beast. The words came hard, with force. Yet, as they disrupted the vicious cycle, they brought new order to his mind. Right, this wasn't him. It couldn't be. He would never be like that. The sense of fear and guilt fell from him like leaves in fall. It was like the image of himself shattered somewhere within, and he was able to distance himself. His chaotic thoughts, which were like moths trapped under a lampshade in his mind, burned away until only clear darkness remained. Born of a broken beast, but not a broken beast. Born of a broken beast, never a broken beast. With force, they came again, but they only strengthened his new enlightenment. Yes, he was free from the beast he once was. The creature that lay awake forever, shaking and starving for the next prey in the darkness, unable to escape his fate. Born of a broken beast, but not a broken beast. Born of a broken beast, never a broken beast. Several minutes after starting to play, the formation sprang into action. The blacksmith had already gotten nervous, but now the soul floating in the center had taken an incorporeal shape and the enchantment was running at full power. As Seth performed the song, he also supplied mana and heat to the formation. He watched the new golem take shape. It didn't follow any of the principles that were needed when engineering a golem by hand, but it followed the fundamentals of a body. The first thing that took shape from molten adamantium and mad ithildin, was a core surrounding the nucleus of the soul. These were the core memories and traits that made up the ego. The bard had tried to slightly curate these, with the choice of his song. From there, the rest of the adamantium and the bones of Seth took the shape of a skeleton, resembling that of a stag. Key parts like the skull, antlers, and some of the leg bones were made of or covered by a thin layer of adamantium. The rest was formed from the black bones of Seth. Growing from the core, along the bones were veins of ithildin, most likely serving a similar purpose as inlays Seth would use for the movement enchantments on a golem, to submit magic power and signals. Starting from the skeleton covered in veins, which had taken the center of the soul shape, the enriched necron started building up like flesh, leaving indentations and grooves that would allow smooth movement of the limbs and parts later on. It grew until it completely filled the outlines of the soul, looking like a stag, carved from black crystal and fashioned with silver antlers. Now, walk through the water of Styx to be truly reborn. The blacksmith ordered it and summoned the waters of Styx as a big sphere of water. The stag looked at him for a moment, before he nodded and turned to walk through the water. Ding! You have created an automaton. Ding! You have gained 1000p power of existence. Strix, this is your steed, Echo. Treat him well, said with anticipation. He had chosen the name Echo for several reasons. The golem was an echo of the water stag, not a rebirth. It was the name of a woman with obsessive love in Olympian myth, fitting the stag's sticky attitude. Lastly, because the original striges were known for the sound, the echo, they created in the night. Ding! You have fulfilled the requirements for System Quest, Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. Ding! You have gained the title Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. The power of all doomsday devices increases by 25%. Creations gain 15% to all attributes in a world, facing its perceived demise. Chapter 1208 Unexpected Situation. Delta. Vermeer observed his work from a safe distance, standing on the rooftop of one of the giant blocky buildings. It still felt a little crazy to him, that cities could look like this, but he had to concentrate on his work. The 2 portals he had set up, using the sets of gate stones the previous teams failed to use, were almost ready. Originally, the teams of legends, were supposed to secure the landing zone for the armies on this side, but things went awry, with the other 4 teams fighting the giant tree. Vermeer could hardly look at the display of powerful skills and spells raining against the tree's giant trunk. The hunter was unsure whether there even was any progress. Looking at it from the outside, the fight was a stalemate, maybe. Jarvan, Soti, Demis, Krista, and the people they brought were too strong to be defeated by the onslaught of roots and vines. In comparison, the tree was suffering visible damage. The blade winds of Jarvan's death claw ripped into the trunk. Soti, who was specialized in archery, was even able to take whole chunks out of the trunk by sending massive swarms of magic arrows against it. Krista's party was even more effective, as the mages were able to calmly chant high-power spells under the protection of her shield. Demis and his order of Kuvdite used sword aura and holy magic to cut and burn parts of the tree, but the resulting wounds were little more than superficial. From their perspective, they made progress. One side was quickly accruing damage while the other didn't. It was clear who had the upper hand. Unlike Vermeer, they didn't see the whole picture. To them, the scars and wounds on the tree were gigantic, but the world saw it from a distance. He had a much bigger view of the guardian tree. And he had to say, they hardly dealt any decisive damage. The huge wounds were a joke compared to the beast's supermassive size. Not only were they not severe, but they also quickly healed without constant fire. Maybe the legends would have been able to sever the trunk and fell the tree if they got serious and worked together, but the current situation was a war of attrition that would take ages without a clear winner in sight. Seeing they wouldn't be able to secure the landing zones anytime soon, he intended to get the invasion force to this side quicker. They could get rid of Minas Mar and then raid the tree with the whole army. Once it was constantly blasted by strategic class magic in addition to the attacks of legends, the tree wouldn't be able to resist anymore. Vermeer snickered when the gates stabilized and finally opened. With this, everything would end soon. He watched the gates in anticipation for the orderly rows of the elite army to march in. Of course, they would first follow procedures and check with a golem eye before. The wolf's sharp eyes caught a sudden movement at the gate. A person came running through the gate. Shortly after passing through the gate, they stumbled and fell. They hectically got up and looked back at the gate. His confusion grew as he saw more and more people exiting from the gate. He recognized the army of Lord Byron by the colors of the armor, but there were no orderly rows, no signs of military discipline. It was a crowd of soldiers simply running at full speed. For a moment he had the illusion that he had heard the sound of music, but it vanished so quickly, that he wasn't sure it was real in the first place. Just what was going on? Vermeer was too far away, unlike the security golems of Minas March. The scenes transmitted to the screen in the command center showed a crowd of soldiers, their faces twisted in fear and many screaming at the top of their lungs. They are coming. I don't want to turn to dust. Just why did we have to update our home call? Don't run too far, you bastards. Get back in line. Commanding officers could be heard among the screams of terror. Not only Vermeer was confused by the scene, but the members of Minas Mar also had a hard time understanding the situation. They were preparing for a similar occasion as the wolf expected, but instead, they got a completely dissolved army, escaping from something on the other side of the gate. Just what are they running from? Lena mumbled, but her question was quickly answered. As the streams of people finally slowed to a trickle, some of them began messing with the portal barrier, moments before the source of fear emerged from the gate. Thick, green vines came from inside the portal, catching some of the stragglers that were blocked by the changed barrier and turning them into mummies. The culprit was clear, seeing the botanical beast smash against the inside of the barrier. I didn't expect that the tree would turn their own gates on them, despite fighting 4 legends at the same time, someone mentioned, staring at the screen, standing right beside Lena. Seth, she exclaimed surprised. Why are you here? Didn't you want to go outside? The princess asked inadvertently. I was, but does this scene look like I need to take action? It is as I feared. The guardian tree already stole my show. Let's save the performance for Nadina. I'm sure she is still lurking out there, the blacksmith asserted, looking at the screen. A great number of soldiers had made it through before the gates were closed off. There were maybe 15,000 to 20,000 soldiers clogging the empty streets outside the tower's barrier. It was hard to estimate, with how many soldiers had spread through the streets. But only a fraction of those that made it through were actually organized. The small group was gathered at the 2 gates, reinforcing the barrier under the command of their officers. Seeing how the rest were still running, or trying to hide, Seth found it weird that they had fled to enemy territory instead of using home call. Let's try to use Operation Sandman and leave the stragglers to the golems to capture, Seth suggested after a moment of thought. Although these guys were on another level compared to the demons, they were disorganized and did not seem in a condition to fight or resist the magic. Capture them? Why would you want to take them alive? Lena asked, surprised by Seth's sudden leniency toward the enemy. After all, these were elites of Spacia, trained to ruthlessly kill and subdue natives of other worlds. To save myself the work. Once they are knocked out, the golems can strip them of their equipment and we can use them as prisoners of war to get more money from Spacia, Seth said nonchalantly. It only took the blacksmith a cursory glance to see the soldiers as a resource with 15,000 to 20,000 sets of epic equipment walking around on his streets. Putting them to sleep meant not to fight them, which meant the equipment wouldn't be damaged and he and his crafting department wouldn't have to repair it either. After that, it felt a little overboard to simply kill people in their sleep, after robbing them. Seth's next best thought was that they could probably get a pretty penny if they captured them. Although they were almost helpless in front of the guardian tree, none of the soldiers seemed weak. Losing such soldiers was a great loss, maybe great enough to get some ransom. We should also help the tree, Lena mentioned, bringing his attention back to the 4 legends and their teams that were trying to destroy Delta's tree. Any suggestions? The blacksmith asked, the princess. She knew the situation better than him. Lena nodded immediately. It seemed that she already had a plan. Yes, let's. Chapter 1209 Legends Unite. Outside Delta. Hey, Ceres? Are you still fighting the Hydra? Were the first words coming from the communication orb, leaving the Parrot of Doom a little confused. Wasn't Seth supposed to be working or something? The Eagle was currently with Reiki and the Faer, who, fortunately for them, managed to reach Blotches in time to save the questing beast's life. It wasn't completely safe, Yet, but with the constant support of magic, music, and potions, Blotches was able to overcome the complicated curses and slowly heal its wounds. The necromancer girl took over. I thought she came on your instructions, the eagle asked back without much care in his voice. It wasn't the elemental's job to fact-check every stupid decision others made. Shit, so that's why all the undead vanished on the walls. Ceres, can you go look for her and make sure she is okay? Lena's worried voice could be heard from behind the blacksmith. Evie is immortal, the worst thing that can happen to her is becoming incapacitated, Seth mentioned to soothe her worries. Ceres, we need you here. Can you return to Delta and look for Evie on the way back? And tell Heads to return, to its maker asked. The elemental cocked its head from side to side, as if thinking about the task, before nodding defeated. He was able to come to look after Blotches because of Evie, so he probably owed her for that. Fine, it said disinterested, and cut the connection. You guys better protect Blotches with your lives. The Parrot of Doom left a final warning before he set off into the sky to look for the chosen of Persephone. Delta. One by one, soldiers slowed down or fell over. Even the ones he managed to gather around him had empty expressions. The commander could also feel it. His eyelids were heavy and his mind was clouded. He bit his tongue in frustration and to clear his mind. Just how had things come to this? Lord Byron's plan was perfect, they even had a group of legends assembled to attack. This abominable tree, he thought looking at the roots that had grasped the edges of the portal, and further at the center of the city, the source of this horror. His fingernail dug into his palms, thinking of the scenes at W234Z. He had seen men get pierced by the vines and turned into mummies that crumbled to dust within seconds. When the barrier broke and hundreds of valiant soldiers were washed away by these things. They stood no chance, they couldn't even evacuate as they had registered the world column as their home for home call. The commander could only feel sorry for those who were left behind to fight these things. They stood no chance, they were just cutting off shoots of this thing. Being even 4 legends had trouble stacking damage on. Crack! The barrier had weakened, as many of the mages around him succumbed to fatigue and the spell. Even he could feel his consciousness slipping, trying to keep up the support for the barrier. Just when he could no longer keep resisting the pressure from inside the barrier, it vanished. Falling to his knees, he realized that the wooden tentacles had frozen and were no longer trying to break through the barrier. After a moment of stillness, they actually pulled by, leaving only the vines that covered the frame of the gate, keeping it active. Oh, looks like some people are still awake, he heard someone mention. With drowsy eyes, he looked back over his shoulder. A group of diverse knights had appeared and at their center stood an attractive woman with green hair. She had an ethereal air to her, a kindness that stood in stark contrast to the brutal-looking knight group. It's all right, Lady Karina. We will just knock out the ones that are still up, a slender knight said, pulling the whip in their hand taut, to enforce their words. Knock out? He didn't even have the chance to react when he felt an impact at the back of his head. This is not working. We have to work together. Krista exclaimed, using holy voice to reach the whole raid team. She had realized that their individual attacks were not enough to deal lethal damage to the tree. They had to combine their efforts and breakthroughs. I guess you are correct, Demas, the Bishop of Kuvdite agreed unwillingly using the same skill. I can help coordinate our attacks, Soti, the hawk exclaimed using the spirit whisper. As a legendary archer, she had the best skills to see the big picture. Even if they were in different locations, she would be able to coordinate the attacks to align at least partially. We are ready to go along with your plan, the priest of Jarvan's party announced, as Jarvan didn't have any skills to communicate with the raid party. They just came up with a raid plan, when the situation unexpectedly changed again, as the gates at their back began closing. What is going on? Did something happen on Byron's side? Demas exclaimed as he defended against a root the size of a whale, trying to crush his shield. Unlike Soti, Jarvan, and Krista, he was not a subordinate of the royal and couldn't contact them directly. I can't get in contact with Lord Byron. Something must have happened on their side. Krista answered. Unlike Vermeer, they were too close to the tree, to see what had happened to the gates that were unprotected. Does this mean the mission is aborted? Should we go back, before the gates close completely? Jarvan's priest everyone stayed silent for a moment, as they concentrated on fending off the tree's attempt to eat them alive. Fuck. Krista, the benign suddenly cursed in the holy voice. I think I know what happened on their side. There are tree roots coming in from the gate behind us, she informed the others, they were legends, not idiots, so they quickly understood what this meant and why they didn't hear from Byron. Although they couldn't know the extent of damage on the other side, if the tree managed to get over there, where no legend was left to defend, they were pretty much doomed. We should get back and help Byron, Sodi suggested. If they returned now, before the gates closed, they may be able to fight the tree back and close the rest of the gates. This way they could prevent more loss of soldiers. Looking at the future, this may have been the better option, however. No. We are fighting the root of the problem right here. We can end it all by winning here, Demis argued vehemently. We have to strike down this impure creature here and now before it can grow even stronger. He spoke like a true zealot. However, he wasn't wrong. With more information, their decision may have been a different one, but at this moment it seemed like the best option to stay and strike down the guardian tree while they still could. If the tree fell, the situation on W234Z would also end. Let's gather and fight together then. Sodi voiced the conclusion they had all come to. Together, they would fell this tree. Cutting their way through a forest of vines, the four legends and their companions merged into one big party. The legends themselves had a good balance. Jarvan was a melee attacker, Demis could act as a tank, Sodi was long-range physical and magic damage while Krista was a pure support. Their individual party, made up of high-level professionals similarly meshed together, creating a good synergy. They all united under Krista's shield, which was not only able to withstand the onslaught of vines but was also located at the only still active gate in the tree's vicinity. This still left the option of retreat. Chapter 1210 Off with their heads. The wolf saw it all happening. His planned reinforcements were apprehended, the gates closed, and the legendary parties combined. Yet, he couldn't intervene. At first, he didn't want to be caught up in a fight against the tree at one of the two new gates. Seeing how there was nothing he could really do to turn the situation for the troops at the gate, he decided to join his colleagues in raiding the tree. Although he was not specialized in fighting against massive creatures, he could do at least some damage. However, when he turned to leave, he had a sudden visitor that needed his attention. "Hello, young friend. It took me a while to find you, but we can finally have a little talk." A friendly old man had appeared behind him. He had a long white beard and a kind smile, as he stood there with his hands behind his back, wearing exotic robes. "Who? You may call me Master Mountain." They were in the middle of coming up with a strategy when the hair in Sodi's nape stood up. Centuries of experience warned her a fraction of a second before a bewitching sound entered her sharp ears and the vines pressing against Krista's barrier slowed. Off with their heads, a whisper snuck into everyone's ears as the music swelled to be heard by everyone. It was a language she didn't recognize, but it snuck into her brain and gained meaning. She was sure she had heard something similar before but she couldn't quite remember. Like her, the other legends looked around, trying to find the source, not really affected. However, party members of lower levels showed various reactions, from looking around shocked and panicked, or outright freezing stiff. This was what she could notice in a fraction of a second before her attention was drawn to signs of movement beyond the wall of vines. "Unholy slash!" someone hollered and a dark energy blade barreled through the forest of vines, crashing into Krista's barrier. The defensive membrane that had withstood even the onslaught of roots trying to crush it, shook. Dark spider webs of cracks spread from where the energy blade struck the barrier. It didn't collapse, but it also didn't recover as quickly as before. At a quick glance, a dark energy permeated the cracks in the barrier. Judging by the name, was this actually the unholy attribute? Beyond the gap stood a muscular minotaur, wielding a giant double-headed axe. It was such a typical depiction of the bull-headed monster, that Sodi was struck with nostalgia for a moment. She remembered the time when she first started adventuring, centuries ago. Like back then, the beast exuded a menacing aura, like the executioner who had come to deliver their sentence. "Dance till you're dead." The new phrase broke her nostalgia, as her leg suddenly jerked a little to the side. She was an elven scout. She had become a legend decades ago. Her body suddenly moving against her will, even if it was just a little jerk, shocked her down to the core. Looking around, Demis, Krista, and Jarvan had experienced something similar, while their parties had begun swaying to the music, at various degrees. Many could forcefully resist the lyrical command, but it was clear that all of them were affected. "Tisk, where is this music coming from?" Demis exclaimed angrily, looking at the dancing people. It was a small number of the Bishop's Knight Order, that was unable to resist because of their lack of level and resistance. As the Order of Kevdite was the biggest group among them, they also had the lowest average quality. Still, heads will roll, the music swelled and she could feel the ground under her feet shaking. As if triggered by the call, something fell from above. A giant, over 300-meter tall colossus jumped down from the guardian tree like a monkey and landed in the city not far from their position. It was a massive figure with glittering golden skin, wearing a golden armor and crown. Even in the shadow of the giant tree, the giant gleamed with brilliance. Looks like Minas Mar won't just let us raid their tree, hey. Jarvan commented on the situation. They had yet to take action. Heads will roll. Another. Jarvan asked, slightly surprised. Another massive figure fell from the tree and landed with a great impact, matching the beat of the music and the swaying dance of the party members. Seeing the creature about a third as tall as the golden colossus, but burning in deep red flames, Sodi was taken aback once again. The last time she had seen a fire titan was in her childhood. Where had such a creature of old folklore crawled out from, to suddenly appear here? She didn't have much time to ponder over this question, as the song kept going. Heads will roll. On the floor. Matching with the first two, a third figure, once again slightly smaller than the former, landed in the city close by. This time, Sodi was just taken aback, because she had never seen anything like it before. It had the body of a giant and from its shoulders grew several serpent heads. It was grotesque. What is that? Krista couldn't help but ask at this sight. Members among the raid team became disturbed by the music and the growing number of enemies. Sodi shared a glance with the other legends. It wasn't smart to jump into action right away, so they decided to wait. Series on the west streets, big tree over everything. The fire's all hot. You're all done. Sodi heard the cry of an eagle above and found the figure of a big bird, covered in lightning, had appeared above them. Meanwhile, the music had become so powerful the ground was literally shaking. Ding! You have witnessed Ceres, the tormentor. Fear has taken hold of you. All your defenses and resistances are lowered by 23%. A legend. There was still a legend Minas Mar could use. Sodi swallowed hard, seeing the presence of the eagle, lowering her defenses and resistance. It negated Krista's presence, which raised all of their defenses by 15%, only leaving the improved healing. Past the eagle, she also saw two other figures floating in the airspace above the city, just below the crown of the tree. She recognized the pets of the Tower Master. One was a giant flying centipede, the other a black emoji, something of a pseudo-dragon. Her focus didn't stay on them for long. Although they were powerful, they were not legends. Her eyes wandered away. As if drawing her gaze, she discovered a small figure standing on one of the branches. Using her elven eyes, coupled with the skills of a legendary scout, she was able to clearly see the culprit. She finally witnessed that bard singing this song, and it matched with her suspicions. A man wearing a dark armor, cranking a weird instrument, singing a demonic song. Seth Smith, Leave 111. This was the Tower Master of Minas March. The description they had gotten and the pictures they had matched perfectly. Everything had clicked, when she remembered where she had heard this kind of language before and remembered their info on the demonic bard. Dripping with divinity, Tatzel stopped tattling. The table's all set. You're all done. It's the Tower Master, he's on the branch up there. He's the one. Sodi was about to warn her allies, when the song interrupted her, sealing her mouth. The priest cries out, the elf cries out, the warrior cries out, the saint cries out, their men cry out. Demis, oh no. Sodi, oh no. Jarvan, oh no. Krista, oh no. Party members, oh no. As the music became even stronger and the beat penetrated their bodies, they were forced to sing along. The priest cries out, the elf cries out, the warrior cries out, the saint cries out, their men cry out. Demis, oh no. Sodi, oh no. Jarvan, oh no. Krista, oh no. Party members, oh no. Twice. It happened twice. Sodi was in a state of shock, as her mouth had moved on its own to go along with the song. Just what kind of instrument was this for someone of that level to manipulate them?